You're at the wrong table.
Her voice low but sharp enough to cut glass. Heads turned. Crystal clinked. The single father froze halfway into the chair, his son's small hand still gripping his sleeve. "I said this table is for donors," she added, eyes cool, perfectly composed. He didn't argue. He stood, calm, shielding the boy with his body, as if the room itself had shifted against them. No one noticed how close the evening already was to unraveling. This wasn't about seating, it was about dignity mistaken for weakness. Before I show you the exact moment the system failed and every executive panicked, you need to see how it began. By the way, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments below. The father stepped back from the table without a word, the chair legs scraping softly against marble. He nodded once, not in apology, not in defiance, just acknowledgement. The kind that came from someone who'd learned long ago which battles weren't worth noise. Around them, the ballroom breathed again, attention drifting back to champagne flutes and polite laughter. Evan Calder adjusted his son higher on his hip, feeling the familiar weight settle his spine. Calm wasn't an act for him. It was a habit forged from years of holding things together when they wanted to fall apart. His eyes flicked once to the woman who'd spoken, Maribel Vance, then away, already moving back toward the service corridor where he belonged. The boy's breathing was uneven, too fast. Evan felt it through the thin fabric of his jacket. He shifted his grip, a subtle pressure at the child's back grounding him. The lights were too bright tonight, too many voices. He'd known that before they ever walked in. The corridor swallowed them in a wash of muted sound. Fans humming, dishes clattering, a generator's low thrum under everything. Evan leaned his forehead briefly against the cool wall, letting the noise steady him instead of overwhelm him. He checked his watch. The timeline was already tight. Behind the ballroom doors, Maribel Vance smiled as a donor approached, the moment already filed away as insignificant. To her, the man had been an interruption, a breach in the clean geometry of the evening. Order mattered. Appearances mattered more. Evan set his son down on a folded crate near the maintenance station and knelt. "Hey," he murmured, keeping his voice low. "Breathe with me, yeah?" The boy watched his chest rise and fall, matching it slowly. The tremor eased. A vibration pulsed through the floor, faint but wrong. Evan felt it before he consciously registered it, the way some people sensed weather changes in old injuries. He stilled, listening. The generator hum was off by half a beat. Not enough for alarms, enough for trouble. He stood, rolling his shoulders, and scanned the access panel. A red indicator blinked, then steadied. Someone upstairs laughed too loudly. Glass chimed again. The evening marched forward unaware. Evan keyed his radio, static. He frowned, adjusted the channel, tried again. Still nothing. His jaw tightened, not with fear, but focus. He'd seen systems fail quietly before they failed loud. Back in the ballroom, Maribel raised her glass, preparing to welcome her guests formally. The Foundation's presentation cued on a massive screen behind her, donor data streaming live from remote servers. Everything was timed. Everything was flawless. Except the hum under the floor slipped again. Evan opened the panel, fingers moving with practiced ease. The smell of warm metal and ozone met him, familiar as breath. He glanced back at his son, who watched him with wide, trusting eyes. "Stay right there," Evan said. "I'm close." The boy nodded, clutching the worn keychain Evan had given him years ago, the one with the old access badge dulled by time. A server rack spiked. Evan swore under his breath. Someone upstairs had rerouted power without clearing, Load, amateur move. Expensive mistake. He started compensating. Hand steady, mind already mapping consequences. If the load tipped again, the ballroom would go dark. If the backup failed, donor data would corrupt midstream, publicly, permanently. In the ballroom, Maribel's assistant leaned in, whispering something urgent. Her smile faltered for half a second, barely perceptible. She waved it off, confident money could fix whatever problem dared surface tonight. In the corridor, Evans straightened, wiping his hands on a rag. The hum stabilized, but only just. He knew that sound. It was a warning, not a resolution. He looked once more at his son, then toward the ballroom doors. The table he'd been told he didn't belong at suddenly felt very close. The ballroom doors muffled the noise, but not enough to hide the tension creeping through the building. Evan lingered just outside the service corridor, eyes lifted toward the ceiling, as if he could see through concrete and chandeliers, to the wires straining above. The hum had settled, but it hadn't forgiven the mistake. Systems remembered stress the way people did. He stepped back to his son, crouching again so they were eye level. "You good?" he asked softly. The boy nodded, fingers still wrapped tight around the old badge on the keychain. Evan brushed his knuckles with his thumb, a silent reassurance, then rose. He hated moments like this, standing between staying invisible and stepping forward. Invisible was safer. Invisible kept questions away, but invisible didn't keep lights on, or data intact, or panic from spreading. Footsteps hurried down the corridor. A junior tech rushed past, headset crooked, eyes wide. He barely glanced at Evan, assuming what everyone else did, that the man in work boots was just there to mop up after real decisions were made. Evan caught a fragment of the radio chatter spilling from the headset. Load imbalance. Main feed unstable. Shouldn't be happening. Evan exhaled slowly. It was happening. He followed at a distance, not chasing, not announcing himself. The control room door stood ajar, screens glowing inside like an exposed nerve. He stopped at the threshold, hands resting loosely at his sides, watching the dance of confusion unfold. Fingers flew over keyboards, voices overlapped. No one was listening to the room itself. "Backup latency spiking," someone said. "That's impossible. We paid for—" "Paid doesn't mean configured," Evan muttered under his breath. A woman in a tailored blazer turned, irritation flashing across her face when she saw him. "This area's restricted," she said. "Staff only." "I am staff," Evan replied evenly, gesturing to his badge clipped at his waist. "Maintenance, the lowest rung." She dismissed him with a flick of her eyes and turned back to the screens. On the main display, donor profiles lagged, names blurring as packets dropped. Evan watched the cascade forming, the invisible math tipping toward failure. His fingers twitched, muscle memory begging for permission. Behind him, his son coughed lightly. Evan glanced back, a thread of worry tightening his chest. He didn't have time for a full fix. He barely had time for a stopgap. He stepped forward. "Your auxiliary feed's drawing from the same node as the lighting array," he said, a voice calm, carrying just enough to cut through the noise. Silence fell. Not respectful, but startled. The blazer woman frowned. "Who asked you?" "No one," Evan said. "But if you don't isolate the load in the next 2 minutes, you'll lose both." Someone laughed nervously. "That's not how this system—" The lights flickered. Just once. Enough. A man at the console swallowed. He's not wrong." Evan didn't wait for permission. He leaned in, pointing, not touching. "There, that reroute. You did it for redundancy, but you doubled demand, split it, now." They hesitated. Authority was a strange thing. It resisted the unfamiliar even when truth stared it down. Another flicker. This time, murmurs rippled through the ballroom beyond the walls. "Do it," the console operator said, voice tight. Keys clacked. The hum beneath the floor smoothed, settling into a healthier rhythm. Data stabilized, lines sharpening on screen. No applause followed, just breath releasing, shoulders dropping. Evan stepped back immediately, retreating to the edge again as if he'd never moved. The blazer woman stared at him, reassessing. "How did you know that?" He shrugged lightly. "Sounded wrong." She scoffed, unconvinced but unsettled. "We've got it handled." Evan nodded. He didn't argue. He rarely did. Back in the corridor, he knelt beside his son again. "Still okay?" he asked. The boy smiled faintly. "You fixed it?" "Not yet," Evan said. "Just bought time." From the ballroom, a ripple of applause rose as Maribel resumed speaking, her confidence restored, unaware how close it had come to slipping through her fingers. Evan listened, already cataloging the next failure point. The system wasn't done misbehaving. He leaned against the wall, eyes closing briefly, the weight of responsibility pressing in. This was the part no one saw, the quiet vigilance, the constant readiness. Power never looked here, but it would feel him soon enough. By the way, if you're still with me, make sure you're subscribed. Stories like this only work if you don't miss what comes next. Evan opened his eyes as another alert chimed faintly from behind the walls. Time was running thinner now. The applause in the ballroom swelled, polished and obedient, rolling toward the stage like a tide Maribel had learned to command since childhood. She stood beneath the lights, chin lifted, smile calibrated to warmth without vulnerability. The brief disruption was already reframed in her mind as a minor technical hiccup, nothing more than background noise in an otherwise flawless evening. From the service corridor, Evan listened to the rhythm of it all, applause masking strain the way perfume masked sweat. He felt the vibration again, subtler now, threading through the walls. Not panic yet, but instability didn't announce itself twice for no reason. Maribel gestured toward the massive screen behind her as the Foundation's mission statement resolved into crisp clarity. Donor names scrolled smoothly again, each one a promise, each one a weight. She spoke about innovation, about resilience, about systems designed to endure. The words landed cleanly, but something in her posture had shifted. She kept glancing, just barely, toward the side of the stage. An assistant leaned close, whispering updates meant to soothe. Maribel nodded without breaking cadence, but her fingers tightened around the edge of the podium. Control mattered. Especially now. Especially with this many eyes watching. Back in the corridor, Evan adjusted, his stance, one shoulder pressed lightly to the wall. He checked his watch again. The timing still didn't add up. Someone had patched the symptom, not the cause. He'd seen that mistake cost millions before, sometimes lives. A catering cart rattled past, wheels squeaking. He reached out without looking, steadied it, easing the wobble before it tipped. The server murmured thanks and hurried on, unaware how close a spill would have drawn attention to the wrong place at the wrong time. Evan's son sat cross-legged on the crate, tracing the edges of the old badge with a fingertip. "Are they mad at you?" he asked quietly. Evan crouched, keeping his voice low. "No, they're just busy." "That lady was," the boy said, searching for the word, "sharp." Evan almost smiled. "Yeah, she is." Sharp people cut quickly, sometimes too quickly. On stage, Maribel transitioned to the live demonstration, the centerpiece of the evening. Real-time impact metrics, transparency, trust. The screen shifted, data flowing in elegant graphs. For a moment, everything held. Then a flicker. Not lights this time. Data. Evan straightened slowly. A murmur rippled through the audience as numbers stalled, then jumped, then stalled again. Maribel paused, just for a breath, then laughed lightly, turning it into charm. "Technology keeps us humble," she said, drawing polite chuckles. Behind the scenes, tension spiked. Evan could feel it like pressure in his ears. He stepped closer to the corridor door, listening hard. The hum beneath the floor had changed pitch. Higher, strained. Maribel's assistant reappeared, face pale now, urgency no longer disguised. She whispered. Maribel's smile thinned. "Ladies and gentlemen," Maribel began, voice steady, "we're going to take a brief moment while we—" The screen went black. A collective inhale swept the room. Glasses stilled, chairs creaked. Evan moved before the sound fully landed. He guided his son farther back, positioning him where the lights from the emergency strips painted the floor in soft amber. "Stay here," he said. Firmer this time. He stepped into the corridor intersection where a service met spectacle. People rushed past now, eyes wide, authority scrambling for footing. Someone barked orders that contradicted the last ones. Radios crackled uselessly. Maribel stood frozen at the podium, spotlight cutting her off from the room, turning isolation into spectacle. For the first time that night she looked small. Evan saw it all, the cascading failure, the overloaded node, the backup choking on corrupted instructions. He saw the path through it too, clear as a map burned into memory. A security supervisor spotted him hovering. "You," he snapped, "get back to your station." Evan met his gaze, unflinching. "Your redundancy loop's feeding itself," he said. "You shut it down now, or you'll lose the archive permanently." The supervisor hesitated, torn between protocol and desperation. On stage, Maribel glanced toward the wings, eyes searching for someone, anyone, who could restore order. Her gaze brushed past Evan without recognition, dismissing him the same way she had earlier, another piece of labor furniture in the room. The hum surged, then stuttered. Evan exhaled through his nose. They were out of time. He stepped forward, crossing an invisible line between where power stood and where it never bothered to look. Evan felt the shift the moment he crossed into the open space beside the stage. It wasn't just physical, it was social, like stepping into a current that pushed back harder the farther you went. Conversations died mid-syllable. A few donors frowned, annoyed that someone in work boots dared enter their line of sight. The security supervisor opened his mouth to object again, but the lights dimmed further, emergency strips brightening in response. A sharp beep echoed from somewhere overhead. Evan didn't slow. He reached the side, console, eyes scanning the diagnostic panel as if greeting an old acquaintance. The system was fighting itself now, looping commands, overheating where it should have balanced. Whoever designed the last patch hadn't understood the architecture. Or they'd never been allowed to. "Sir, you can't," the supervisor started. "If this goes another 30 seconds, Evan said calmly, fingers hovering but still not touching, "you'll corrupt donor histories tied to regulatory filings. That's not a reset fix, that's lawsuits." The man froze. "How would you—" Another alarm cut him off, sharper this time. Heads turned, murmurs thickened. On stage, Maribel stood rigid, microphone dead in her hand. The spotlight still burned on her, unforgiving. She watched staff scramble at the edges of her vision, none of them meeting her eyes. Control was slipping, and with it the story she'd prepared. Evan felt his son's gaze on his back, steady and trusting. That alone settled. Him. "Who authorized the reroute?" Evan asked, still not touching the console, A junior engineer swallowed. I followed the redundancy protocol. Evan nodded. For the old system, this one doesn't fail gracefully. It fails all at once. He finally placed his hands on the panel. The surface was warm. Too warm. The supervisor hesitated one last time, then nodded sharply. Do it. Evan moved. His fingers flew. Not rushed, not frantic, but precise. He isolated the loop, redirected load manually, then killed a non-essential feed that no one else had even noticed drawing power. The hum beneath the floor dropped an octave. Relief rolling through the building like a held breath released. The black screen behind Maribel flickered, then glowed back to life. Data snapped into place, cleaner than before. The alarms silenced one by one. A wave of stunned quiet swept the ballroom, followed by scattered applause that grew as people realized the crisis had passed. Not polite, applause this time. Grateful. Uncontrolled. Evan stepped back immediately, hands lifting away from the console as if it had burned him. He retreated 2 steps, then another, already trying to disappear, but attention had found him. Maribel turned slowly from the podium, eyes locking onto the man she'd dismissed earlier. For a heartbeat, she didn't recognize him. Then something clicked. Not memory, but contradiction. The image she'd filed away didn't match the reality standing in front of her. Who are you?" she asked, the microphone crackling back to life in her hand, her voice carrying despite herself. Every head turned fully now. Evan swallowed, aware of the spotlight bleeding into the edge of the stage, aware of his son standing just beyond it. He didn't step into the light. He answered from where he was. "Maintenance," he said simply. A ripple of disbelief moved through the crowd. "That's not possible," someone muttered. The junior engineers stared at Evan with something close to awe. "You rewired the live redundancy without admin access," he said. "That shouldn't—" "It does," Evan replied gently. "If you know where the ghosts are." Maribel's grip tightened on the microphone. She looked out at the donors, then back at him. The room waited. "What's your name?" she asked, quieter now. Evan hesitated just long enough to glance at his son. Then, evenly, Evan called her. A murmur stirred again, different this time. One of the older board members stiffened, eyes narrowing as he studied Evan's face more carefully. "Calder?" the man repeated. "As in Calder Systems?" Evan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The board member stood slowly. "That's not possible. Calder Systems was sold," Evan finished. "Years ago." Silence crashed down, heavy and absolute. Maribel's face drained of color. She looked at Evan as if seeing him for the first time, really seeing him, and realizing how badly she'd misjudged the ground beneath her feet. Evan shifted his weight, discomfort creeping in now that the work was done. This was the part he'd never liked. The staring. The rewriting of narratives by people who'd ignored him 5 minutes earlier. The board member cleared his throat. "You designed half the architecture this foundation uses," he said, almost accusingly. "Why are you—" Evan didn't let him finish. "Working?" he asked quietly. "Because someone needs to." A few people laughed nervously. Others looked away. Maribel lowered the microphone slowly. When she spoke again, her voice was different, less sharp, stripped of armor. "I told you, you were at the wrong table." Evan met her gaze, steady. "No," he said. "I was exactly where I needed to be." The lights in the ballroom brightened fully, restoring the illusion of normalcy. But nothing felt the same anymore. Not for the people watching. And certainly not for the woman on stage, who now understood the cost of looking down. Evan turned back toward the corridor, toward his son, knowing this night wasn't finished with him yet. The applause faded unevenly, replaced by a low buzz of voices trying to reorganize reality fast enough to stay comfortable. Evan moved away from the stage, shoulders loosening now that the immediate danger had passed. He felt eyes on him from every direction, curiosity sharpening into calculation. He reached his son first, kneeling so the boy could climb into his arms. The familiar weight grounded him again. "All good," Evan murmured, more to himself than anyone else. The board member who'd spoken earlier stepped closer, gaze fixed not on Evan's face now, but on the keychain swinging lightly from the boy's fingers. The old access badge caught the light, its edges worn smooth by years of handling. "That badge," the man said slowly. "Where did you get it?" Evan followed his stare, then sighed. "Old habit," he said. Didn't think it mattered. The man's brows knit together. "That's a first-generation master credential," he said, voice dropping. "They stopped issuing those before the acquisition." Around them, a small circle formed, quiet, intent. The junior engineer leaned in, eyes widening. "That explains how he bypassed the lockout," she said. "Those keys aren't even in the registry anymore." Evan shifted his son higher, uncomfortable with the attention. "It's just plastic," he said. Maribel approached, steps measured, expression carefully neutral. The earlier sharpness was gone, replaced by something unsettled. "That system was designed to prevent exactly what you did," she said. "And yet you moved through it like it was familiar." Evan met her gaze briefly. "Because it is." The board member exhaled. "You didn't just work on the architecture," he said. "You authored the contingency logic." A murmur rippled again, this time edged with respect. Evan felt the old instinct rise, the urge to deflect, to minimize. "I wrote it so people wouldn't panic when things went wrong," he said quietly. "Guess that part still needs work." The junior engineer let out a breathy laugh. "You're the reason the failsafe even existed," she said. "We've been trying to reverse engineer your notes for months." Maribel's eyes flicked again to the badge, then to Evan's son, clutching it like a talisman. Something in her posture softened. "You carry that for luck?" she asked. Evan shook his head. "For memory," he said, "and because my kid likes the weight." The boy nodded solemnly, squeezing it tighter. Silence settled, thicker now, as the implication landed. The object wasn't a symbol of power, it was a relic of responsibility, repurposed into something gentler. A donor cleared his throat. "Why are you here?" he asked, not accusatory, genuinely confused. "Tonight, I mean." Evan shrugged. "Because the job needed doing," he said, "and because my son wanted to see the lights." Maribel looked around at the watching crowd, then back at Evan. "I told you, you were at the wrong table," she said, voice low enough that only those nearby heard. "Yes," Evan replied, "you did." "I was wrong," she said, the words costing her visibly. The admission shifted the air. It wasn't absolution, it was acknowledgement. Evan nodded once, accepting it without ceremony. He started to turn away again, attention already drifting back to the system's lingering echoes in his mind. Before he could disappear, the board member spoke up. "We'd like you to stay," he said, "at least until the event concludes." Evan hesitated. He glanced at his son, then toward the corridor. "I'll stay close," he said, "but I don't need a seat." Maribel watched him go, something thoughtful replacing embarrassment. Power, she was realizing, didn't always announce itself. Sometimes it wore scuffed boots and carried children. As Evan leaned against the wall again, listening to the building settle. He felt the smallest easing in his chest. The badge tapped softly against his son's knuckles, a quiet reminder of where he'd been and why he'd left. If you're still following this story, make sure you're subscribed. Moments like this only matter if you see what they lead to. Behind the walls, the system purred steadily now, ghosts laid briefly to rest. Evan closed his eyes for a second, knowing the night wasn't finished teaching lessons yet. The ballroom settled into a cautious rhythm again, conversations resuming with a new undercurrent of curiosity. Evan stayed where he was, just inside the shadowed edge of the service corridor, rocking his son gently as the building systems continued their low, steady song. He listened the way some people listen to music, noticing patterns, anticipating the next note before it arrived. Across the room, Maribel conferred quietly with two board members. Their heads bent together, expressions no longer indulgent but intent. The older man, who'd recognized the Calder name, kept glancing toward Evan, as if trying to reconcile the figure in work boots with the legacy he remembered from conference rooms and white papers. "Is it really him?" one of the board members whispered, not nearly quietly enough. The older man nodded once. "I sat in a war room with him during the blackout years ago," he said. "He slept under the table for 3 days straight. Refused interviews, refused bonuses too." Maribel's breath caught slightly. "Why would someone like that be here?" she asked. "Because he walked away," the man replied, "and when he did, the industry lost its conscience." The words landed heavier than accusation. Maribel looked again at Evan, this time without the filter of hierarchy. She noticed how he stood angled toward the walls, never fully turning his back on the infrastructure. How his hand rested instinctively near his radio, even though it hadn't worked earlier. How his attention never strayed far from his child. A staff coordinator approached Evan cautiously, clipboard hugged to her chest. "Sir," she said, unsure how to address him now, "we're rerunning diagnostics across the network. Would you mind taking a look, just to confirm?" Evan hesitated. He didn't want to become a fixture. Fixtures got expectations attached. Expectations pulled you back into worlds you'd left for reasons that still ached. He glanced at his son. The boy nodded, as if understanding more than words allowed. "All right," Evan said. "But I don't need control, just visibility." They led him to a secondary console near the back of the ballroom, far from the stage but wired into the same nervous system. As Evan scanned the readouts, the junior engineer hovered nearby, unable to contain herself. "I read your early frameworks in grad school," she blurted out. "They told us you disappeared because you couldn't adapt to corporate growth." Evan smiled faintly. "That's one way to tell it." "What's the real one?" she asked. He adjusted a parameter, smoothing a fluctuation before answering. "I could adapt," he said. "I just didn't like who I became when I did." The engineer absorbed that quietly. Across the room, Maribel watched the exchange, something like discomfort tightening her shoulders. She'd built her authority on decisiveness, on being the smartest person in the room. Tonight had complicated that identity. A donor approached her, voice hushed but excited. "Did you know who he was?" the woman asked. Maribel shook her head. "No," she said. "I knew what he looked like." The donor frowned, then nodded slowly, understanding dawning. At the console, Evan finished his scan. The system was stable now, but fragile in the way all patch things were. He made a note on a scrap of paper, 3 lines, shorthand only he would understand, and handed it to the coordinator. "These are your pressure points," he said. "If anything spikes, start there." She stared at the paper like it was a map to buried treasure. "Thank you," she said sincerely. Evan stepped back again, retreating toward his familiar edge. He didn't notice Maribel approaching until she stopped a few feet away. "I owe you an apology," she said, quietly enough that it didn't feel performative. Evan looked up, meeting her eyes. "You don't owe me anything," he replied. "I told you you didn't belong," she continued, "and I was wrong." Evan considered that. "You saw what the room taught you to see," he said. "That's not personal." Maribel swallowed. "It should be." They stood there for a moment, the noise of the gala flowing around them. For the first time, Maribel noticed the child's hand still clutching the old badge, the way it connected past, to present without ceremony. "Why keep it?" she asked softly. Evan glanced down at it. "Because systems fail," he said, "and I like remembering why I built them the first time." Maribel nodded, something shifting behind her eyes, not guilt alone, but recognition. As she turned back toward the stage, Evan felt the subtle release of a night turning on its axis. The discovery was complete now, no longer rumor, but accepted truth. He hadn't claimed his old place. He'd simply reminded them it existed. He settled back against the wall, sun warm against his chest, listening to the building breathe. Whatever came next, it would come with eyes open. The gala moved forward, but it no longer flowed the same way. Conversations bent toward Evan wherever he stood, glancing off him like compass needles losing north. He stayed near the wall, a fixed point in the building's periphery, listening to the quiet language of systems instead of people. The hum beneath the floor held steady, but something else had shifted. An instability not in wiring, but in authority. Maribel returned to the stage to finish the program, her voice composed again, but now measured. She skipped a slide, shortened a section, adapted in real time. The donors didn't mind. They were watching her more closely now, weighing how she handled the unexpected. Evan watched too, not critically, just observant. Leadership under pressure always revealed more than rehearsed confidence. As the presentation wrapped, staff began transitioning the room for the closing reception. Lighting shifted warmer. Music softened. That was when Evan felt it, the slightest hitch like a breath caught halfway. He straightened, eyes narrowing. The junior engineer across the room stiffened at the same moment, staring at her screen. "That's not possible," she muttered. Evan was already moving. He crossed behind the bar, slipping through a service door into a narrow passage that ran parallel to the main electrical spine. The air was warmer here, heavier. He rested a palm against a wall, feeling vibration through bone. Too much draw, different source. He keyed his radio again, still dead. Footsteps echoed behind him. "What is it?" the engineer asked, catching up, clipboard forgotten. "Someone brought an auxiliary rig online," Evan said. "Did you approve anything new?" Her eyes widened. No, everything external was locked. Evan grimaced. Then it wasn't external. They reached a junction box partially concealed behind decorative paneling, new, hastily installed, its casing still smelling faintly of fresh plastic. Evan knelt, inspecting the feed. "Portable crypto mining unit," he said flatly. "Someone siphoning processing power during peak load." Her mouth fell open. That would fry the node. "Or worse," Evan said, already opening the panel. "It'll mask itself as legitimate traffic until it collapses the whole segment." "Who would do that?" she asked. Evan didn't answer. He didn't need to. They were halfway through isolation when the lights dimmed again. Not fully, but enough to ripple unease through the ballroom. Music faltered. A few guests laughed uncertainly. Maribel felt it immediately. She turned toward the wings, heart pounding now, the earlier lesson still fresh. This time, she didn't wait. "Find him," she said sharply to an aide. "Now." The aide barely had to look. Maribel followed the line of tension straight to the service door, heels clicking faster than protocol allowed. She found Evan crouched at the junction, hands moving with controlled urgency, the engineer assisting now without question. "What's happening?" Maribel demanded. Evan glanced up briefly. "Someone's abusing your infrastructure," he said. "If we don't shut it down cleanly, you'll lose donor trust and data integrity." Her stomach dropped. "Can you stop it?" "Yes," Evan said, but not quietly. Maribel hesitated only a second. "Do it," she said, "whatever it takes." Evan nodded once and pulled the final lever. The system didn't fail this time, it reacted. Screens across the ballroom lit up with cascading alerts as the illicit load was forcibly exposed. A name surfaced in the logs, tied to a mid-tier sponsor seated near the front. Conversations died instantly. Security moved, chairs scraped. A man protested loudly, indignant, then panicked. Maribel stood frozen as the truth unfolded publicly, undeniable. This wasn't a glitch, it was exploitation. Evan stepped back from the panel, heart steady, eyes already tracking downstream consequences. The hum beneath the floor dropped into a healthier rhythm, relieved of its parasitic drain. In the ballroom, donors whispered, outrage swelling. Not at the failure, but at the betrayal. Maribel lifted a hand, commanding attention without raising her voice. "This event," she said clearly, "will continue. Transparency is not optional." Her gaze flicked to Evan, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. Security escorted the sponsor out amid a storm of murmurs. The room buzzed with a new energy now, less polished, more real. Evan returned to his place near the wall, sun stirring slightly against him. He pressed a gentle kiss to the boy's hair, feeling the weight of what had just happened settle. The crisis hadn't just been technical, it had been moral. And this time, no one pretended it was small. The ballroom didn't recover quickly after that. It couldn't. The removal of the sponsor left a visible gap, not just an empty chair, but a dent in the illusion everyone had arrived wrapped in. Conversations resumed cautiously, eyes darting toward screens, toward exits, toward Evan standing once again where power usually forgot to look. Maribel stayed on stage longer than planned, fielding questions with a steadiness that surprised even her. Each answer was measured, transparent. She didn't deflect. She didn't minimize. The room responded to that honesty, tension easing into something closer to respect. Evan watched from the periphery, listening to the system's pulse normalize. The illicit load was gone, but the night had revealed vulnerabilities deeper than circuitry. Trust, once cracked, behaved like glass. It could be reset, but never fully invisible again. The junior engineer approached him, quieter now. "Security's sweeping everything," she said. "But there's chatter. People are asking about you." Evan sighed softly. "They can ask." "Are you staying?" she asked, almost hopeful. "For a bit," he said, "until it's stable." She nodded, grateful, then hesitated. "You know," she added. Half the room just subscribed to the idea that titles don't equal competence anymore. Evan gave a small smile. "That idea's been around a while." Across the room, Maribel concluded the evening formally, thanking donors not just for contributions, but for patience. The applause this time felt different, earned, not automatic. When she stepped down, she didn't retreat to the executive lounge. She walked straight toward Evan. "I meant what I said earlier," she told him, stopping a respectful distance away. About being wrong. Evan met her gaze. I know. I don't want this to end with apologies, she continued. I want it to end with something fixed. He studied her face, searching for performance. He didn't find it. Fixing things takes time, he said, and it usually starts where no one wants to look. She nodded. Then show me. That was new. Before he could respond, his son shifted, blinking awake. Did we win? The boy asked softly. Evan chuckled under his breath. Not that kind of night, buddy. Maribel's expression softened at the sound. You did more than win, she said quietly. You protected something. Evan adjusted his grip on his son. That's the only metric I ever cared about. A coordinator interrupted, voice urgent but controlled. Final diagnostics are green, she reported. No residual anomalies. Evan exhaled, tension finally easing from his shoulders. Good, he said. Then I'm done. Maribel frowned slightly. Done for tonight, she clarified. Evan considered that, eyes drifting briefly to the systems panel, then back to his son. Tonight, he agreed. They stood there for a moment, the noise of the gala softening into background hum. The hierarchy had shifted, subtly but irrevocably. People passed Evan now with nods instead of glances. Respect, once withheld, flowed awkwardly but sincerely. As Evan turned toward the exit, Maribel spoke again. You were never at the wrong table, she said. I just didn't know what the table was for. Evan paused, then nodded once. Most people don't, he replied. He walked toward the service doors, boots quiet on marble, the badge on his son's keychain tapping gently with each step. Behind him, the gala continued, not unchanged but recalibrated. And before we go further, if you're invested in where this is heading, now's a good time to subscribe. You don't want to miss what this night sets in motion. Outside the ballroom, the corridor lights hummed steadily, reliable again. Evan stopped, resting his forehead briefly against the cool wall, letting the moment settle. The crisis had passed, but preparation had begun. Because fixing one system was never the end, it was always the beginning. The service corridor felt narrower now, as if the building itself were leaning in to listen. Evan slowed his steps, the weight of his son warm and steady against his chest. The hum followed him, softer than before. No longer strained, but it still carried memory. Systems never forgot what they'd survived. Behind him, the gala continued to unwind, guests filtering toward exits in small clusters, voices low and speculative. He could hear fragments drifting through the open doors. Questions about safeguards, about transparency, about who had really been in charge tonight. None of them called his name. That was fine. Names complicated things. He reached the maintenance alcove where he'd left his jacket and tools. The familiar smell of oil and dust grounded him further. He set his son gently onto the crate again and shrugged into the jacket, fingers brushing the worn seams like muscle memory. You tired? He asked softly. The boy nodded, eyes heavy. But I wanted to stay, he murmured. I know, Evan said. You did good. The child smiled at that, small and proud. Footsteps approached from the ballroom side, slower this time, deliberate. Evan turned as Maribel appeared in the corridor light, the sharp lines of her evening softened by exhaustion. She stopped a few feet away, respecting the boundary he'd never had to ask for. They're asking questions I can't dodge anymore, she said. About oversight, about access, about why a sponsor could exploit us so easily. Evan nodded. They should. She studied him for a moment. You're not interested in stepping back into it, are you? He didn't answer right away. He checked the indicator lights on the nearby panel, habit more than necessity, all green. "I stepped out for a reason," he said finally. "And I didn't step back in tonight, I just kept things from breaking." Maribel absorbed that. "Still," she said, "you see things we don't." "That's because I'm not standing where you are," Evan replied. "Different angles." She exhaled slowly. "I'm starting to understand that." Silence settled, not awkward, just honest. From the ballroom came a burst of laughter, relief, not celebration. The night was loosening its grip. A security officer poked his head into the corridor. "Everything's clear," he said to Maribel. "We've locked down the SAO, compromised access points." "Good," she replied. "Document everything." He nodded and withdrew. Maribel looked back at Evan. "There's going to be fallout," she said. "Board reviews, policy changes. People will want assurances." Evan met her gaze evenly. "Assurances come from work, not words." She smiled faintly at that. "I was hoping you'd say that." He shifted his son higher again, feeling the small arms tighten around his neck. "Whatever happens," Evan said, "remember what you saw tonight, not me, the blind spots." Maribel nodded once, decisively. "I will." She hesitated, then added, "For what it's worth, thank you, not just for fixing things, for not letting us pretend it was nothing." Evan inclined his head. Gratitude accepted, not banked. Maribel turned back toward the ballroom, shoulders squared again, but something in her posture had changed. Less armor, more awareness. Evan waited until her footsteps faded before moving again. He gathered his tools, slipping them into his bag, each familiar weight settling into place. The badge on his son's keychain tapped lightly as he moved, a quiet metronome marking the end of the night's tempo. As he headed toward the staff exit, the junior engineer caught up to him, breathless. "Hey," she said, "I just wanted to say, what you did tonight, it changes things. For people like me." Evan paused, considering her earnest face. "Then don't let it be a story," he said. "Let it be a standard?" She nodded, eyes bright. "I will." Outside, the night air was cool, the city humming at a different frequency than the building he'd just left. Evan stepped out into it, the door closing softly behind him. The gala lights glowed through the windows, distant now, contained. He adjusted his grip on his son and started toward the parking structure, boots echoing faintly on concrete. The victory hadn't been loud, it hadn't been claimed, but it had been set. Preparation was complete. What came next would belong to daylight. Morning came quietly, the kind that didn't announce itself with urgency but still carried consequences. Evan sat in his truck on the lower level of the parking structure, engine off, hands resting on the steering wheel. His son slept in the back seat, jacket pulled up to his chin, breathing slow and even. The city above them was waking, unaware of how close the night before had come to spilling into something louder. Evan didn't rush. He rarely did anymore. His phone vibrated once in the cup holder. Then again. He ignored it until the third time, when instinct finally nudged him. Unknown number. He answered without greeting. "It's Maribel Vance," the voice said. No sharpness this time, just clarity. "I won't take much of your time." Evan glanced back at his son, then out at the concrete pillars. "You already are," he said, not unkindly. "I understand," she replied. "That's why I'm calling, now. Before this turns into something bigger than it needs to be." Evan listened. "The board convened an emergency session an hour ago," Maribel continued. "The incident triggered mandatory disclosure. Auditors are involved, regulators too." "That was always going to happen," Evan said. "Yes," she agreed. "But what happens next is flexible." Evan closed his eyes briefly. "Careful," he said. That word gets people into trouble. She didn't argue. They want answers, she said instead. About the architecture, about legacy access, about why our safeguards failed and who still understands them. And you thought of me, Evan said. I thought of the truth, Maribel replied. You happened to be part of it. Silence stretched between them. Evan let it. Silence often said more than persuasion ever could. They're asking me to make a statement, she added. Public, today. Evan's jaw tightened slightly. About what? About accountability, she said, and about the person who stopped the collapse. He opened his eyes. No. I expected that, she said quickly. But listen. I am listening, Evan cut in. And I'm telling you no. I didn't do what I did to be named. I did it so your systems wouldn't hurt people who trusted them. Maribel exhaled, slow and controlled. Then, let me do this the right way, she said. Let me acknowledge failure without shifting credit. Let me name the blind spots without naming you. Evan considered that. He looked at the concrete, the oil stains, the faint tire marks layered over years, places power passed through without noticing. That's closer, he said, but don't soften it. I won't, she promised. Another pause. They also want to revise internal policy, she added. Access controls, oversight pathways, and they want consultation. Evan smiled faintly. There it is. I'm not asking you to come back, Maribel said quickly. Not like before. I'm asking you to help us fix what we broke, on your terms. Evan leaned back in the seat, the vinyl creaking softly. He thought of the junior engineer, eyes bright with possibility, of the coordinator clutching his handwritten notes like lifelines, of the sponsor let out under the weight of his own greed. Put it in writing, Evan said. No press, no titles, no optics, and no decisions made without someone in the room who actually listens to the systems. Maribel didn't hesitate. Done. And one more thing, Evan added. Yes? Don't build it around me, he said. Build it so you don't need someone like me next time. Her voice softened. That might be the hardest part. It always is, Evan replied. Aka, ça va. They ended the call without ceremony. Evan set the phone down and sat for another moment, listening to the structure settle as cars came and went above. He checked the time, then reached back to gently wake his son. Hey, he murmured, time to go. The boy blinked awake, rubbing his eyes. Is it over? Evan smiled. That part is. They drove out into the morning, sunlight catching on windshields, the city stretching awake in front of them. Evan merged into traffic without urgency, mind already moving ahead, not to recognition, but to repair. Behind them, in a glass-walled conference room high above the street, Maribel stood before her board and spoke plainly. She didn't name a savior. She named a failure. She didn't protect appearances. She dismantled assumptions. The room listened. By noon, the story had shifted. Not a gala mishap, not a technical glitch, a reckoning. Evan never saw the headlines. He spent the morning fixing a loose cabinet at home, hands steady, radio humming softly on the counter. Systems big and small required the same care, and this time, someone powerful had finally learned to look where the work actually happened. The afternoon light filtered through the kitchen window in narrow bands, dust motes drifting lazily, as Evan tightened the last screw on the cabinet hinge. He tested it once, twice. Solid. He wiped his hands on a rag and straightened, listening to the quiet hum of the house. Pipes settling, refrigerator cycling, the steady rhythm of a place that didn't demand performance. His son sat at the table coloring, tongue caught between his teeth in concentration. "It doesn't squeak anymore," the boy said, glancing up. "Because it was loose," Evan replied. "Loose things make noise." The boy nodded, as if that explained far more than cabinets. Evan's phone buzzed again on the counter. He glanced at it this time. No number. He let it ring once, then answered. "It's done," Maribel said on the other end. Her voice sounded different in daylight, less polished, more human. "The statement's out. No names, just responsibility." Evan leaned against the counter. "How'd it land?" "Hard," she admitted. "Some donors pulled back, others doubled down. The board wasn't comfortable, which tells me it was necessary." "That's usually the sign," Evan said. There was a pause. Then, they approved the oversight changes, independent audits, rotating system reviews, and a permanent labor side advisory seat. Evan closed his eyes briefly. "Good." "They asked who should fill it," she added. "And," he prompted, "I told them they'd figure it out once they stopped looking at resumes and started looking at floors," Maribel said. A faint smile tugged at his mouth. "You'll make enemies talking like that." "I already had some," she replied. "At least now they're honest." Silence settled again, comfortable this time. "I meant what I said," Maribel continued, "about fixing things. I won't waste what you showed us." "I know," Evan said. He did. The difference wasn't words. It was where he'd chosen to stand when the pressure hit. After they hung up, Evan set the phone down and returned to the table. His son looked up at him, eyes curious. "Was that the sharp lady?" he asked. "Yes," Evan said. "She wanted to make sure things stayed fixed." The boy considered that, then returned to his drawing. "Good," he said simply. Later that evening, Evan walked to the corner store, the neighborhood settling into its familiar cadence around him. People passed without recognition, and he liked it that way. At the register, the clerk chatted about the weather, about traffic, about nothing that mattered much. On the small television mounted above the counter, a news segment played silently. Footage from the gala, carefully edited, rolled by. Maribel stood at a podium, speaking earnestly. The caption read, "Foundation announces major oversight reforms. No mention of him, just systems, just change." Evan paid and stepped back outside, the bell chiming softly behind him. Breathed in the cool air, shoulders relaxing. Justice didn't always look like applause. Sometimes it looked like policy written by people who'd finally been uncomfortable enough to listen. As he walked home, he passed a group of maintenance workers gathered around a utility truck, laughing loudly. One of them glanced at him, then did a double take. "Hey," the man called. "You were at that fancy thing last night, right?" Evan slowed. "I was working," he said. The man grinned. "Heard someone like us save their skins." Evan shrugged. "Sounds exaggerated." "Maybe," the man said. "Still nice to hear." Evan nodded once and kept walking. At home, his son had fallen asleep on the couch, crayons scattered across the floor. Evan picked them up quietly, setting them back in the box. He draped a blanket over the boy and sat on the edge of the couch for a moment, watching his chest rise and fall. This was the part that mattered. Not recognition, not reversal, restoration. The night before had shifted something larger than either of them. It had reminded people in power that systems were only as ethical as the people who listened to them, and that the ones closest to the ground often heard the warnings first. Evan leaned back, exhaustion finally catching up to him. Tomorrow would bring new problems, smaller ones, solvable ones. The world hadn't changed completely, but a crack had formed in the old assumptions, and light was getting through. Somewhere downtown, Maribel sat alone in her office, lights low, rereading the oversight framework one more time. She paused at a clause she'd insisted on adding, language that protected anonymous contributors, that valued function over status. She signed the document and set the pen down, feeling the weight of the day settle in her bones. For the first time since inheriting the foundation, she felt like she was building something real. And in a quiet house across the city, Evan slept with one ear, tuned to the gentle hum of a system at rest, knowing that dignity didn't need a stage to be restored. It only needed someone willing to see it. The city moved on, as cities always did, absorbing disruption and filing it away as background noise. For Evan, the days that followed settled into a rhythm that felt earned rather than imposed. Mornings were slow breakfasts and school drop-offs. Afternoons filled with work that kept his hands busy and his mind quieter. He listened more than he spoke, watched more than he reacted, letting the world prove what it would do with the lesson it had been given. At the foundation, change didn't arrive with banners or speeches. It arrived in meetings that ran longer than expected, in uncomfortable questions that no one rushed to answer. Maribel sat through every one of them. She didn't delegate the hard parts anymore. When someone suggested softening language or postponing implementation, she remembered the hum beneath the floor, remembered how close everything had come to collapsing while she stood under perfect lights. She didn't forget where the warning had come from. Weeks later, a quiet update circulated through internal channels. Oversight committees expanded. Access reviews widened. A new advisory process formed, one that required voices from labor, operations, and maintenance before any system-wide decision could move forward. There was resistance. There always was. But the resistance meant something new this time. Resolve. Evan never attended the meetings. He didn't need to. The proof came in smaller ways. A coordinator called once to ask a question before making a change. A junior engineer sent an email saying she'd stopped a bad decision because it didn't sound right. Those were the victories that lasted. One evening, Evan and his son walked past the downtown hotel where the gala had taken place. The lights were on again, bright and orderly, the building humming with practiced confidence. The boy tugged on Evan's hand and looked up. "That's where the wrong table was," he said. Evan smiled faintly. "Yeah," he said, "that's the place." "Was it really wrong?" the boy asked. Evan thought about that. "It was the wrong idea," he said, "not the wrong people." They kept walking, footsteps echoing softly against the pavement. Inside the hotel, a small plaque had been added near the service corridor entrance. It didn't name anyone. It didn't celebrate an event. It simply read, Operational Integrity Zone. Report, question, protect. Most guests never noticed it. Staff did. That was enough. Maribel saw the plaque one night while walking the building alone after hours. She stopped, read it twice, and rested her hand briefly against the wall. The place felt different now, not safer in a naive way, but steadier. Honest. She knew there would be other crises, other tests. Leadership wasn't about avoiding them. It was about not ignoring the quiet warnings when they came. She turned off the lights and left the building, the city reflecting back at her through glass she no longer mistook for distance. At home, Evan tucked his son into bed and lingered for a moment, listening to the slow, even breathing. He sat on the edge of the bed, exhaustion and peace sharing the same space in his chest. The badge hung on its hook by the door now, no longer a secret, no longer a burden. Just a reminder. The night the words had been spoken, "You're at the wrong table," had changed more than anyone realized at the time. It hadn't elevated him. It hadn't restored a past life. It had corrected a falsehood. He had never been in the wrong place. The world had simply forgotten what tables were for. If this story stayed with you, if it made you think about who gets overlooked and who gets listened to, then let's keep going together. Ask me for the next story title. Subscribe and don't miss our next story. Single dad janitor made a mute girl. Whisper. Unaware. Her cold, powerful mom was watching and crying. Trust me, you'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next?